Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians Youth in Action series, Conversations About Our Future. As we are gathering in the month of November, we are celebrating Native American Heritage Month. And in today's conversation, we are talking about Indigenous food sovereignty. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michaela Pavlat. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. I'm also a cultural interpreter at the National Museum of the American Indian. I would like to begin by gratefully acknowledging the Native peoples on whose ancestral homeland we gather today, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities that make their home here. So today our conversation will be focusing on food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is defined in many ways and varies across communities. But in general, food sovereignty can be understood as the ability and the right of people to define their own policies and strategies for sustainable production, distribution, consumption of food. And it guarantees the right of food for the entire population. Food sovereignty is something that is extremely important to Indigenous peoples of the entire Western Hemisphere. And many of the foods that we see across the entire globe today actually have Indigenous roots. Foods such as potatoes, corn, beans, squash, and tomatoes all originated here in the Americas. And they were staples in traditional food systems that supported and sustained Native communities across the Western Hemisphere. So the food that we think about, the ones that I just listed, is not just limited to farming, and food sovereignty isn't just limited to farming. Hunting and fishing are also core parts of Indigenous and traditional foods. But European colonization really disrupted that. So many Native people lost access to their traditional foods. And it's even anything from the deliberate extermination of bison herds to federal policy that removed Native peoples onto reservations, therefore restricting access to our traditional foods and even the sustainable practices. But today, many Native youth are returning to our traditional food sources and, again, sustainable ways of living. And they're doing this through political action and sustainable practices. Today, we are joined by three amazing food activists, Samuel Lopez, Mariah Gladstone, and Alecia Lennie, to talk about the importance of food sovereignty in their communities. All three of these activists come from different communities across the Western Hemisphere. And all are great examples of how food sovereignty truly depend on communities and where they're located. For example, Alecia is up in the Northwest Territory of Canada. Mariah is coming from Montana. And then we have Samuel in the Southwest. So now I would love to introduce each of them. And as you each introduce yourself, please say a little bit about what got you into this work. So let's start with Samuel.
Skuk Cherokee or Skuk MBJUK, who's such a boy. I am Jiggy Samuel Lopez, Abomja, Tohono O'odham, Machoriga, Southern Arizona. Good day, everybody. My name is Samuel Lopez. I come from the San River District of the Tohono O'odham Nation in Southern Arizona. Our historical lands extend as far south as Hermosillo of Mexico, as far west as Gulf of Mexico, as far east as the San Pedro River, and as far north as Phoenix, Arizona. So all of this is O'odham land, but yet we are confined to these places that we now call reservations. Currently, the Tohono O'odham Nation is the second largest land base of any Native American tribe in North America, right behind Navajo Nation. We had tribal citizens, approximately 35,000 tribal members, a part of the Tohono O'odham Nation. I got into this work when I was the age of 13 years old here in the San River District, where we had the opportunity to work for our youth summer program here at the district. And I had the opportunity to work at the San River Co-op farms, where I continue to do my work through agricultural practices on the Tohono O'odham Nation. So it is very much an honor to be here today and to share these words with you all. Dohoy, Josh and Sohoy Gaduk.
Thanks, Sam. Alecia, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your work?
So, my name is Alecia Lennie, and I live here in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. I am Inuvialuit, and I'm here to share um, about my Inuvialuit culture. I have very great pride in who I am and the way I was brought up. Um, Food has just been, we need it every day, and I love it. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Alecia, thank you so much for joining so far up north. We're so excited to our conversation. Mariah, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about what got you into this work?
Sure thing. Okay, nista natana ko amachkes tawakaki. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariah Gladstone, and I am coming to you guys from the Blackfeet Nation in present-day Northwest Montana. I got involved with food sovereignty and food advocacy primarily because I was interested in pushing back against the health epidemic that Native people face because of the forced destruction of our food systems. And as I began the work that I do, I realized that there are so many more benefits to revitalizing our food systems. Not only do we gain nutritional health and physical health, but we also in turn strengthen our connection with the land, the ecosystems, and our spiritual and emotional well-being.
Thank you. Well, let's dive into this conversation. And I think, Alecia, you were starting off to say it. Why are we talking about food? Why does food matter? And why does our relationship with food matter? Sam, let's start with you.
Our relationship with food matters because we as Indigenous people, I guess in a broader sense, uh, these seeds have survived thousands of years and so many, revelations in our history, not only as United States of America, but within our own Indigenous communities. And when we realize how strong that relationship is, when we realize that our food has gotten us this far to where we are today, and that relationship needs to be stronger. Not to say it isn't right now, but we need more of it. We need it in the homes, we need it in the communities, we need it in our nations. And some of our nations are very unfortunate that we don't have that. But it's moments like this where we help together and try to cultivate those seeds and try to turn the soil for the next history of, traditional seeds for our tribal nations. So, and our food has gotten us, through so many, health epidemics and pandemics, that our food is what kept us alive. Our food is what kept us healthy, and our food is what kept us as our people. And so, we take care of the food, it takes care of us. So it's a 50-50 relationship when working with traditional foods.
Absolutely. And in conversations with Alecia, I think you can just jump right into that about, why a relationship with food matters. Could you share a little bit more?
Yeah, so the Inuvialuit, they've been living in the north for thousands of years. And part of that reason is because they survive with seasonal hunting. We follow the migration patterns of the environment, of the animals. We respect the land and the animals ourselves, and all natural elements. Our relationship with food matters because these skills that we are taught are the same skills that were given to us in the beginning, and this is how we survived. Um, yeah, and it's very vital to protect our lands so that our populations stay healthy and they return every year.
Thank you. You're both really, you're talking about like the past and the future. Mariah, why does our relationship with food matter?
I look at food and our relationship to it in this great historical context and how we as Indigenous people resist and push back against settler colonialism. And, as someone that's looked at the history and how our food systems have been so disrupted, I can see the intentional targeting of our food systems in an effort to control Native peoples. As the 1850 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report that wrote, "It is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week." The goal, of course, to force Native people into dependence on government food systems so that we would not push back against land theft and genocide and this wave of colonial expansion. And I recognize that our food systems not only are so essential to our cultural well-being and to our presence on the land today, but are also very much tied to our political sovereignty and the way in which we approach our landscapes and are able to assert authority over our current nations. And so, it is through food and our ability to feed ourselves that we are able to resist colonial forces to this day and into the future. And by restoring those things, we exercise resilience and are able to use the tools that our ancestors gave us through these food systems to power us as Native people continue to survive and thrive moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like each of you are really, following our traditional ways and listening to your ancestors and continuing. I like that you just said like resistance. And each of you working in food sovereignty or in our food systems. Earlier I gave this very general definition of food sovereignty, but I want to hear from each of you what some of these terms mean. So Sam, what does food sovereignty mean to your local community?
Well, when you look at I guess the Google dictionary, it says being able to have a say in where the food you grow and where that food goes after it is harvested. And yes, that is true. Being able to have a say in where your seeds are planted, when they are planted, when you water it, and when you harvest it. Being able to have that say of where, I guess, the steps in that process are is your sovereignty as people who grow that food of your particular nation, of your particular community, or your particular area. Um, but even beyond that, I think being able to have a say in where these seeds go and to give them out to people. Um, in our community in the year of 2017, our seeds of the nation were to be patented by the company of Monsanto. But the people of our community, fought that. Our people of our community pushed back uh, Western ideals of patenting seeds because you can't patent life and you can't patent something that is living. And when you get into this work of agriculture, when you get into this work of food sovereignty, you really see that a seed is a life and it has a lifespan just like us, and it needs to be taken care of. It needs to be treated as a human being because you're putting it in your soil, you're using your water, you're using your energy, your love, your everything about you. That seed is absorbed and it becomes your seed, and you can't patent that life because it becomes a child, it becomes a living being after that. And so being able to have a say in that, being able to have a say in the seeds that have been cultivated for thousands of years within your community is very much an honor and should be preserved and protected as much as possible.
Yeah, that definitely is like a core part of food sovereignty for your nation. And I mentioned there's multiple terms, Mariah. Can you explain a little bit about food desert and what that means, or a
Yeah, of
definition?
course. Food desert is a term that we hear a lot when we talk about food systems and food access. And of course, it's a term that's been defined by the USDA through the federal government, and relates very much to our ability to access a grocery store. Though there's a lot more that goes into food access. It doesn't talk about the local producer down the road that grows produce that you can buy directly from. It doesn't talk about your foraging that you may have access to, the hunting opportunities, the fishing opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily address the affordability of food at grocery stores either. And so we look at food deserts, and I also, Sam probably relates to this, deserts are not vacant landscapes where there are no food, right? And so I don't like the term desert being used in that negative term either. But also it removes the agency. It doesn't talk about why a lot of reservations are lacking in food access, or why we struggle to access healthy, affordable foods. And I think that is something that we need to be better at defining terms for, recognizing the areas in which supermarket redlining has taken place and the restrictions that we still face in terms of leveraging capital to start production and being able to get food deliveries where we can sell food at affordable prices, where we can process food in our own communities and sell it back to our people or distribute it amongst our people, rather than having to export it off reservation only to be sold back to us at premiums. And I think that there's so many more terms that we can be using and ways of incorporating systems and definitions that go beyond just food desert and really talk about the parties responsible and then how to fix those things and heal them.
Yeah, these definitions need to include that Indigenous perspective rather than just have the colonial or government understanding of that. And Alecia, thinking about food security, what does that mean in your local community?
Food security is ensuring that your family won't go hungry. It's ensuring that you have the traditional food in your freezer that will last until the next hunt. It's kind of defining like a successful hunter, to and that successful hunter to be able to abide within the Inuit unwritten laws, and above all is respect. Like, before you go on a hunt, you don't plan what you're going to do with your meat because you don't got it yet, and that's not respecting the animal at all. That's just putting yourself above that animal when you should be equal. It's just to understand that the hunter is a part of the environment, and you only take what you need, and you always share with others that are unable to hunt anymore, and that have families that need to be provided for. It's really just protecting the land, and in turn protecting yourself and your family for the next hunting season.
Thank you for that. Because when we think about food security or food insecurity, we don't hear that Indigenous perspective or the way that you think about food security in your community.
Yeah.
And I just saw some pictures there. You're carrying your caribou, right?
Yeah, that was my first caribou hunt, where I had to carry the head and the antlers because the hindquarter was too heavy for me then. I think I was only like 15 in that picture.
That's amazing. It's a great picture. So looking at, you're talking a lot about traditional food sources, and maybe let's dig more into our work. Mariah, you have this online presence, an amazing website called IndigiKitchen. Can you tell me a little bit more about your intended audience and the goal of IndigiKitchen?
Yeah, I started IndigiKitchen in late 2016 in order to help get people excited about the restoration of our traditional foods and to reteach some of that information that was taken from us in terms of recipe preparation and harvesting and food preservation, and just making foods from our ancestral ingredients that we can make in our modern kitchens and that we can serve hopefully after we get home from work at the end of the day, to be able to prepare these things and really begin to incorporate these foods back into our diets today. So I started IndigiKitchen by making really short, made for social media videos. And with that, the goal was to be able to help Indigenous people reconnect with that knowledge, but also in a way that empowered people to recognize how easy it is to prepare these foods. When we look at recipe books, they're not always written for Native populations, not only with the recipes themselves, but also there's a lot of French terms in most recipe books. And we also see just a lot of challenge in navigating that these food systems and these foods that we haven't had access to over the past few generations with these systems of subsidized food, whether it be rations or commodities or these different boxed food programs that we've seen coming to our communities. And so restoring those things and helping get people excited about traditional hunting and harvesting and growing practices and building this database of Indigenous food.
Thank you. It really is an amazing website. And I was just thinking about some of the recipes because, in the United States, we have Thanksgiving coming up. So maybe incorporating traditional food. At least I know you were just in October. So thinking about getting into those resources is a great way to incorporate that into our foods. And continuing the work in our communities, Sam, what are some of the biggest challenges to working to increase food sovereignty in your community?
I think individually is getting out there and actually for a lot of us, I know it's hard to take that first step. It's hard to want to have a garden. It's hard to go out there and harvest these traditional foods. But once you do that, I think it really creates a lifestyle. And today what I see is that a lot of, I guess, movements that are created are only for the moment. But I think us who are involved in this agricultural world, who are involved with traditional foods, how do we encourage that into a lifestyle? How do we encourage that for the long term, not just the short term goal once we accomplish it, just to forget about it, but how do we go beyond that? For the community, I know it, like I said, I guess getting to a particular area, whether that be transportation or money, funding is always an issue
Mhm.
when trying to start something big on such a scale. But maybe it's just in the home. And I say this a lot. I guess this chain of being a community is that it really does start in the home. It starts with
Mhm.
wanting to have that motivation with your family members, with your parents or who guardians, people who are older than you in the household. That how do you have that motivation? How do you support that? And for a lot of us, supporting people is hard. And for myself, that is a challenging aspect of that, is supporting
Mhm.
people, um, having somebody to talk to, just I guess simple things that the average person doesn't think about. We as Indigenous people face a number of challenges that the average person does not encounter in their life, such as not having a PO box because of your rural community, not having transportation because of the dirt roads, not being able to have good education because of funding from the federal government. All these different things are tied to um, money, and we can't. I guess when we try to do great things, that does become a barrier. But when you're a community, we all have different, pieces of the puzzle that when we come together, we make a perfect whole and we make a community. And we need to learn how to get to that point. I know some of our
Mhm.
communities face that challenge of not having, that missing piece, and it's frustrating for us who are trying to make that change. Like, what is that missing piece? Um, but once we get that piece, and once we mold together into the gears that we are, that momentum of a community starts to move forward. And so, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to encourage and support within our communities.
Yeah. I really loved what you said. It's a lot of these movements are more than just a moment, and so really getting it into your house and into your lifestyle is important. And Alicia, you have expressed that importance of traditional food systems. It's a huge part of your life. But why is food sovereignty important to our future? And I think Samuel mentioned earlier about the pandemic. Um, so especially during the pandemic, why is this important to our future?
Yeah, so when we hunt and gather in our community and you provide others with food that they're not able to get, that really instills pride and pride in your culture and who we are. Um, and when you're going and you bring home food, you're not only bringing home food, you're you're bringing home medicine, you're bringing home building materials, you're bringing home tools, and you're bringing home materials to make art. um,
Mhm.
it's um, it's really important. It's not just the traditional foods that is important. It's sharing your knowledge. So how to hunt, how to store it, how to cook it properly, and really to teach the young people the way that we were taught how to live. With COVID, I think it really shed light on subsistence lifestyles. Like, all the stores shut down, everyone was going crazy. But
Mhm.
you do have those people in the community that will have traditional food in their freezer. And they're always willing to share, which is, that's the sense of community. We did have the IRC here, the Inuvialuit Regional Corp, and the Gwich'in. They had COVID funds that they gave out that really helped. They gave money for groceries and they gave money for food. And I heard I was really against all the COVID. I was like, oh, COVID sucks. But I got talking with an elder who brought to life that COVID gave us money to be on the land again, to be with our family. There's a lot of big families in my community, and it costs a lot to get out. And so COVID did bring money in so that these families could get out and do what they were taught to do and teach their young people. So COVID really, it was a time to turn to elders and seek information on traditional foods and when and where to gather them. So it's a win, 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 lose-ish.
Yeah.
So really a time to learn. So
Yeah, that's really powerful. I was just going to say it gives us time to, kind of ground ourselves again. I think even what you've mentioned before about getting out there is a way to also like mentally take care of yourself and emotionally. Mariah, Sam, do either of you want to add on about the importance of our future, after COVID and food sovereignty? Let's see, Mariah.
Yeah, I think there has been a realization through the pandemic and the consequential restrictions that have been put in place about how delicate our food systems are as we rely on external forces. And so with the pandemic, Blackfeet has, I think, rightly put ourselves on very strict restrictions. But along with that is also, of course, this mandatory 14-day quarantine if you leave the reservation. And that includes to go grocery shopping. Even though it's an essential activity, you still are potentially risking exposure off of the reservation. And because of our multi-generational families here, because of the risks that we're not willing to put our elders under, have been kept on pretty tight lockdown for the duration of the pandemic. But along with that, we've also seen some of our food systems on reservation communities in Montana really be have this realization of what's happening. And so some grocery stores on reservations have been dropped by their suppliers with less than 48 hours notice. And those grocery stores are struggling to find a new supplier. And then when they find a new supplier, they attempt to charge them massive deposits, much larger than grocery stores have to pay outside of the reservation communities. And they argue that it is because they will not be able to pursue them if they don't make their minimums or whatever, because it's a sovereign nation. But to me, it sounds like a huge example of nutritional and supermarket redlining, and our ability and reservation communities' ability to access food. That said, it's also pushed our communities and our tribal nations here in the state to work really hard to put in place more food sovereignty initiatives. So looking at a multi-species processing facility so that we on Blackfeet are able to process our own beef and bison here locally, and then distribute it to our own food programs, and then to sell it off the reservation. We're looking at systems where we can write our own food and agricultural policy, such an essential platform of food sovereignty, but just the ability to regulate our own food systems, to be able to define organic, to have our own inspection services, to regulate the amount of fertilizer that you're able to put on your fields here within the boundaries of our tribal nation. And to really look at all of those things in this context. But I think COVID has helped bring a lot of it to light and help us recognize why it's so important for us to be able to feed ourselves rather than have to rely on external forces and external dynamics and governments.
You are leading into my next question about, why is food sovereignty important? And what are ways communities can strengthen that? You gave a perfect example about the what was I going to say? Oh, thank you. The meat packing and being able to distribute that. That's a beautiful example. Sam, what are some ways that the community can strengthen their food sovereignty? Or why is it important to them, to everyone?
When we look at it at face value, it just seems that if all of our community members had gardens, if all of our community members were out there harvesting wild foods, and it would be done. But I don't think that that's the case. I think with especially with a lot of us, I think it comes down to cultural identity. It comes down to knowing who you are as a person. And even if it's not through these cultural aspects that our community knows, maybe if it's helping set up, maybe if it's helping cooking, maybe if it's going out there to go chop wood, to go cook these foods, maybe if it's going out there to help prepare the fields, even if it's not planting, but even if it's not helping with that, at least you're doing something, whether that's skating, whether that's drawing, whether that's painting, whether that's running, at least you're doing something. And to strengthen that, it really just start with that self-motivation. But I know for a lot of us, forgiving is hard. Forgiving ourselves is the most difficult step. But when we look at our communities, and I'm kind of leading into a lot of topics, especially when it comes to dealing with food, and in order to have, I guess, that opportunity to have that relationship with food, it really starts with forgiving yourself. It really starts with, acknowledging that maybe the things in your life aren't your fault, and that you are perfect, and you are worth it, and you are important. And it's important to have that relationship with yourself before you go out there and start having this relationship with others and traditional food, because then that's going to take a lot out of you, not only as a person, but as your family and as a community.
Yeah.
So
Alecia.
when I guess it's a
go
lot
ahead.
of those, it's a lot of those things, comprised into one, and I hit a lot of topics, but I guess that's just, I guess, the gist of it without going really into detail.
Well, I think you were, again, more examples. And Alecia, I was just thinking immediately, I was like, Alecia could speak on some of that too, about, how you can strengthen that in their communities, or why it's important.
Yeah, well, we need to keep our culture alive. And we need to teach how to harvest a caribou, how to harvest a beluga, when to harvest muskrats. And we need to teach our young people not to overhunt. Only take what you need. And we need to teach them why we let the leaders pass, like the caribou. We let the leaders pass because they're that herd's elder. They're showing the caribou their migration route every year. Without their leaders, it would be hard for them to navigate. And then with muskrats, it's a really good example. Muskrats are hunted in the spring because that's when they're full of meat, they're full of nutrients, and you can use their hide. You can make clothing out of it, or you can sell it if you need the money. Whereas in the summertime, they're known to fight. They have those teeth and claws for a reason. And the summertime, they're not pretty animals. They're more related to the rat part of themselves. Um, so it's just teaching little, I guess, but big things about
Mm-hmm.
the animals. It's all really important to maintain the longevity of the land and animals. Um, and I would like to see more cultural activities where it's open for all ages to attend, just to have the community working together. And I just want to see a recovery for everyone, like all relationships between my people, the government, my people, and so on.
Yeah.
We're all going to be here a while, so we need to figure out a way to keep everyone healthy.
Yeah. And coming up to our last question before the audience, I want everyone to kind of think about in a few words, what can allies do uh, to support you in your work? And let's start with Sam.
In a few words.
Should I phone a friend and then come back to you?
Yeah. I'm trying to
Mariah, go ahead.
make this very inspirational.
Try to ramble for a bit, Sam.
Just go
No,
on.
I think one of the big things that allies can do is to support Indigenous producers. The American Indian Foods Program, housed through the Intertribal Agricultural Council, has a great resource of Indigenous producers, so you can order directly from them, support the work that they're doing. Of course, that helps bolster our own tribal communities, but also creates a space where we're able to recognize the importance of keeping those foods and those plants or animals alive, and creates a restoration project in itself for that. I also think that regardless of where you are, I think that it's very important that you understand whose homeland you are occupying
Mhm.
and connect with that landscape in some way, because regardless of whose land that is, if you're occupying it, it is your responsibility to caretake that land now too. And getting out, identifying the plants, the animals that live around you, identifying the things that grow wild outside your front door that you can eat, what other creatures rely on those foods for their own nourishment, and what type of activities will endanger them. Find those things out and push to make sure that you're taking care of those spaces.
Perfect. Thank you. Sam, you ready? Few words.
Yeah. When it comes to people that are wanting to help with Indigenous communities, when it comes to people who aren't outside, I think it's important to realize your place, and it's important to realize that when that help is needed, that you know a lot of our communities are very hospitable. A lot of our communities are very open arms when the time is right. Um, to people who are inside the community, I encourage you to find out who those people are that are going to help you in life, who are going to mentor you in life, and who are going to be your supporters in life. And especially before you even do that, love yourself, love your self identity. You know,
Mhm.
find people that can be your support system in your life. Find people that can encourage you in life, and also do the same for others. Um, we all are in
That's
this together.
beautiful.
We all are trying to change lives. We all are trying to inspire hope within ourselves and within our communities. So that is what I encourage.
Thank you. Alecia, in a few words, how can allies help to support this work?
Well, allies can just listen, understand. You can see the problem. You can probably identify the problem that we have in our communities. Um, the only thing that I would ask is for you not to look at us as your problem to fix.
Mhm.
We like way up here in Inuvik, we did have like residential schools here in town. This small, we have about 3,500 people in this town, and we're still recovering from that. It's a long healing process, and just let us heal at our pace. and kind of to get, I guess, off topic a bit, a lot of times our traditional knowledge holders would clash with the scientists that come up here and do all the sciencey stuff that they do. And they're like, oh, your populations are declining and this is why. Oh, you need to do this to fix that. And our elders with that traditional knowledge that lived up here for thousands of years, they know that populations just fluctuate. That's just what they do. It's natural. And the only way that our people survive that is just survive the best way you know how.
Yep.
And just let nature take its course and trust that all is going to be well. If you're respecting yourself, your family, your friends, the animals, the land, well, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's like allies are respecting Indigenous knowledge. Thank you for that conversation. This is fantastic. I want to get to some audience questions if you are ready. I'm going to start off with Mariah. You used the term, can you explain a little bit about grocery store redlining? And maybe just a small definition of that?
Yeah, sure thing. Redlining, of course, if you're familiar with, comes from a term that defines how housing lending programs systemically denied mortgage access to people of color or restricted it to certain neighborhoods. And then, of course, you get modern segregation as imposed by the lending sector. So when we look at supermarket redlining, we're looking at the ability of Indigenous communities or communities of color, this happens in urban areas as well, to access the capital, the investment funds necessary to build grocery stores or to put down deposits for grocery store deliveries and that food distribution system that we talk about. And other restrictions as well. Sometimes producers are not able to borrow money through the typical programs for lending because they're not able to leverage trust lands as collateral. And so there's been this pushback and this attempt to rewrite some of those policies. We talked to folks when we worked on the Farm Bill advocacy about how we change this redlining that is still occurring on reservations, especially as it relates to food and agriculture.
Thank you. I had no idea of that definition. And then one, I think, Alecia, you'd be really great to answer this, and Sam, if you want to jump in. And I just lost it. How is the climate crisis affecting your traditional foods?
Okay, so just this, 2 days ago I went for ice fishing, and it was fine. Like there's not much snow on the ground, so like it was a bumpy ride. But when we got to the creek to go fishing, it was still open, and I'm like if I had gone there alone, like I went with my dad, but if I had gone there alone, I would have went straight home. And just because it's so scary, you know, it's everything's supposed to be frozen right now. It was just really set me back because you can't control anything in this world. It's you just take what you're given.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's really great. We have so many questions in here that I want to share with all of you. I just think we had a fantastic conversation. I learned so much, and I appreciate all of you joining for this. And I want to thank everyone that has worked on our Youth in Action program and our participants, those that came before us. Again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And now I encourage all of you to visit our website, americanindian.si.edu, and to learn more about our programs, about our museum. And please be sure to check out our YouTube page. This will be posted there in a few coming weeks. I want to give a special thank you to the National Council of the National Museum of the American Indian for their generous support for this program. And I want to thank you all and have a good day.